we are faced with two different things coming from Burkina Faso. A protest. One protest is coming from France, the colonial ground, and another protest is coming from Burkina Faso. And we are going to compare the two protests to see what exactly is happening. Don't worry, don't be confused. I will break down details of this whole bazawala friti thing happening in regards and connected to Burkina Faso. All the protests are connected to Ibrahim Traoré. This is the first time in the history of Africa.
Oh my God! In a world where everyone's connected, have you ever paused to think about the struggles happening all around us? Today, we're diving deep into two powerful movements that have taken the world by storm. One in Burkina Faso and another in France. At first glance, these events may seem worlds apart, but there's so much more beneath the surface. Join us as we unravel the intricate connections, the compelling narratives, and the shared fight for identity, autonomy, and justice that resonate across borders. This isn't just a local issue, it's part of a thrilling global struggle that links the hopes and dreams of people everywhere. What does this mean for governance, unity, and the future of our societies? Hit that subscribe button now to follow our journey. Let's explore the dynamics at play and amplify the voices that need to be heard. Your perspective matters. Get ready to dive into a powerful analysis that challenges the status quo. And remember, together, we can create change. Let's get started. To comprehend the protests in Burkina Faso, it is vital to understand the socio-political backdrop defining the nation. Burkina Faso, historically known as the Upper Volta, has grappled with socio-economic challenges and political turmoil since gaining independence from France in 1960. The past 2 decades have seen an increase in extremist violence, perpetrated by groups associated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. As a result, the government has struggled to guarantee security, which has resulted in widespread disillusionment among the populace. The military government that deposed the previous administration in early 2022 pledged stability, but has faced skepticism regarding its effectiveness. As insecurity pervades the nation and humanitarian crises escalate, the people's patience is wearing thin. The recent protests erupting in the streets reflect a deep-seated dissatisfaction with governance, a yearning for security, and a rejection of external pressures that continue to influence national sovereignty. The protests symbolize not just local frustrations, but also resonate with broader themes of resistance against neo-colonialism and external interference in the continent's affairs. To fully appreciate the complexity of the protests in Burkina Faso, one must acknowledge the active role of various stakeholders. A plethora of activist groups comprises both local and diaspora citizens advocating for political reform, human rights, and social justice. These activists leverage their platforms to amplify marginalized voices and critique governmental actions, often branding the military's actions as oppressive. Some of these individuals are former members of the government or journalists who have fled selective persecution. They often take to social media to express solidarity with the people of Burkina Faso, while highlighting the government's human rights violations and war crimes. Compounding this, international NGOs, including Human Rights Watch, have extended their support, documenting allegations of torture and unlawful killings that the military government has allegedly perpetrated against dissenters. However, critics argue that the portrayal of the situation often lacks nuance. Some activists in the diaspora may venture to condemn a government they perceive as tyrannical, yet their critiques can inadvertently alienate citizens who have witnessed an increase in insecurity and violent extremism. This complicated narrative creates a rift, fostering alienation between those in power and those struggling to make their voices heard amidst the chaos. The protests in Burkina Faso have taken on various forms, employing strategies that resonate with a populace yearning for change. Organizers have harnessed social media, quickening the mobilization of youth and citizens who feel marginalized. This tech-savvy generation utilizes functionalities like live streaming, TikTok, and Twitter to convey their messages, capturing the attention of the international community and galvanizing momentum in the streets. Demonstrations often feature a combination of peaceful marches and more aggressive confrontations with law enforcement. Protesters have voiced their demands through chants, slogans, and symbolic acts, such as burning effigies of government leaders or boycotting state-sponsored activities to amplify their grievances. The vibrancy of these protests demonstrates a commitment to advocacy, but also raises concerns about violence that can erupt when feelings of frustration and hopelessness boil over. As protests stirred in Burkina Faso, conflicting narratives began to emerge, echoing across various media platforms. These narratives have profound implications for public perception, revealing the power of media to shape discourse around the validity of the protests. Various local and international news outlets generated coverage that frequently oscillates between portraying the military as a source of order and as an oppressive regime that stifles dissent. The media landscape has become inundated with rhetoric surrounding so-called terrorists and freedom fighters, with competing definitions of these terms influencing public sentiment. While proponents of the military government assert that it has a duty to combat violent extremism, detractors lambast its actions as overly aggressive. Human Rights Watch and other international organizations have gained prominence by publicly advocating for dissenters, persistently urging the military government to respect the lawful objections from citizens. Such organizations have amplified stories and narratives about allegedly unjust detentions or arbitrary arrests that infuse the grassroots movements with international urgency. These dynamics serve to paint a picture of polarization within the country and fuel discontent among citizens. Across the Mediterranean, France has observed the turbulence gripping Burkina Faso with a mix of concern and frustration. The colonial legacy between these two countries casts a long shadow, leaving a relationship complicated by historical grievances and recent geopolitical maneuvers. France retains considerable sway over its former African colonies, leading many to argue that the country's political and economic interventions have often perpetuated instability rather than resolved it. In the context of the current protests, French activists, primarily from the diasporic community, have raised their voices against the military government in Burkina Faso, calling it repressive and militaristic. Yet, such protests often take place within the comfort of French urban centers and typically receive international media attention. The core issue at stake becomes whether external protests conducted miles away can genuinely convey the complex realities faced by Burkinabe citizens on the ground. Activists in France have mobilized campaigns calling for solidarity with those suffering from government oppression in Burkina Faso. However, their criticisms sometimes lack a comprehensive understanding of the socio-political landscape, which often leads to accusations of neo-colonialism in how these activists engage with their messages. The social media landscape plays a significant role in how narratives around the protests are framed. As opposing factions vie for control of the discourse, the line between truth and disinformation becomes increasingly tenuous. Activists in Burkina Faso wield narratives of oppression in their arguments against the military's actions. At the same time, defenders of the military counter these accusations, positing that the military is engaging in necessary action to secure the nation against external threats like terrorism. The rapid spread of disinformation poses a critical challenge to the protests, risking the potential of alienating allies or misrepresenting the actual conditions facing the population. Propaganda campaigns on social media can contribute to escalating tensions, reinforcing divisions that already pervade interpersonal and intercommunal relationships. It warrants acknowledgement that misinformation does not solely stem from local factions. External media can also contribute to the narrative that prioritizes entertainment value over factual representation. In a saturated digital landscape, messaging often distorts realities, reframing activists as either heroes or villains based solely on which political alignment they favor. In the midst of the chaos and confusion surrounding the protests, a powerful Pan-African sentiment emerges. For many across the continent, Burkina Faso's resistance signifies a movement towards greater unity among African nations, promoting a collective identity and encouraging solidarity across borders. The phrase, "We are all Burkina," has become a rallying cry for Pan-African unity, a symbol that transcends national boundaries and emphasizes common struggles faced by many nations on the continent. This renewed sense of solidarity has the potential to serve as a critical touchstone for voicing shared grievances and advocating for collective political action. The youth movement in Burkina Faso, which asserts its determination to define its path against colonial remainders and neo-colonial encroachments, resonates with other movements striving for similar goals. While some outsiders advocate for the governments in Burkina Faso to concede to international norms of democracy and human rights, many Burkina-Faso citizens find themselves asserting the importance of their voices, their customs, and their traditions as they seek to carve their distinct futures. It is this assertion that binds them together within a national identity and draws resonance with fellow Africans who see Burkina Faso as both reflection and embodiment of a broader regional struggle. This moment of transformation highlights stark contrasts, not just between the protests in Burkina Faso and France, but also within the nuances of activism. The citizens of Burkina Faso are navigating a treacherous landscape filled with the threat of imposed narratives aligned with former colonial powers. In contrast, those protesting in France are more shielded, engaging in advocacy from a position of perceived privilege as members of a nation whose historical actions have shaped contemporary politics. This juxtaposition further illustrates a failure to reconcile the lived experiences of Burkina-Faso citizens who desire authentic change with demonstrations led in spaces where their unique struggles may be overshadowed by broader ideological battles. For this reason, the calls for solidarity demand introspection. French activists and citizens must ask whether they genuinely represent Burkina-Faso voices, or risk imposing their ideologies while sidestepping crucial discussions about power, privilege, and identity. The essence of the protests in Burkina Faso lies within the energy and passion of grassroots movements. The vibrant protests reflect a desire for democratic transformation and represent critical intersections of local and global challenges. As activists within Burkina Faso advocate for transparency, their efforts illustrate the power of collective action rooted in shared experience and aspirations. As these protests unfold, it is also vital to highlight the ways that grassroots organizations have prompted real change. Groups organizing protests in Burkina Faso often work tirelessly to ensure movements stay rooted within the communities they seek to represent. This diligent effort cultivates a resilience that surpasses individualistic ambitions and blends seamlessly with broader calls for accountability and governance. To respond to injustice, organizations foster an engaged citizenry that continually demands transparency and justice. This resilient spirit empowers the collective populace and remains a critical reminder of the need for solidarity between fellow Africans in advocating for accountability. The protests presently shaping the political landscape in Burkina Faso serve not just as a moment in time, but a powerful statement of intent to redefine governance moving forward. For citizens, the growing desire to hold leaders accountable and resist oppression is powerful. The youth in particular, emboldened by the commitment to elevate their voices, remain positioned in the forefront of a changing landscape. Amidst fears of poor governance and the resurgence of authoritarianism, there are opportunities for constructive dialogue that prioritize the aspirations of all citizens. In the wake of the protests, it becomes crucial for leaders to embrace transparency, establish channels for engagement, and reaffirm the need for governance driven by effective representation. History informs the present, especially regarding the risks of surrendering power to destabilizing forces. Burkina Faso's history is laden with the legacy of leaders like Thomas Sankara, whose commitment to transformational governance sparked aspirations across Africa. However, his violent overthrow serves as a cautionary tale against the fragility of power. In confronting a deeply divided political landscape, a renewed commitment to principles of accountability, engagement, and unity is vital. The same historical tensions that have led to unrest should guide leaders in acknowledging the ethical implications of governance. Lessons from the past must inform our approach to future governance and instill a sense of purpose woven into the very fabric of this new generation. As the protests in Burkina Faso continue to evolve, the narrative emerging is not solely one of opposition against the government, but a broader story of hope, resilience, and collective aspiration. Amidst the cacophony of competing voices, it is essential to recognize the importance of unity. The dream of a fortified national identity intertwines with the ambition for solidarity across Africa as a whole. In this age of interconnectedness, the responsibility lies not just in fostering dialogue, but in amplifying voices from the ground that call for true representation, equality, and justice. The insistence upon re-examining power dynamics, engaging authentically, and offering solidarity transcends national boundaries. To navigate these tumultuous waters unites us all, reminding us that the course of history rests squarely in the hands of the people marching forth with courage. As we watch the unfolding events in Burkina Faso, let us reflect on the broader landscape of governance and activism across Africa. Lessons of solidarity, empowerment, and resistance should resonate deeply through the corridors of political leadership, eliciting a paradigm shift in governance definitions and practices. As this chapter in Burkina Faso's rich history continues to unfurl, resilience prevails. In a nation determined to define its own voice amid global turmoil, one fervently hopes that the eventual outcome will be woven from its own narrative, nurtured and sustained by a populace unified in aspiration, capable of charting its future and embodying the ideals of justice and self-determination. It's an evolving story that will not only shape Burkina Faso, but will also have profound implications for all of Africa. Together, the winds of change can tilt the scales toward a future where nations are not merely defined by their pasts, but are instead empowered to forge their own destinies.